What if the most mundane place you know, like Walmart, held the most terrifying secrets? I'm pulling back the curtain on a graveyard shift at an Idaho Walmart, exposing the unspoken laws that govern its eerie nights. You'll never look at a mop bucket the same way again. The fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual drone as Alex Harrison pushed through the employee entrance of the Boise Valley Walmart at 11:45 p.m. The cold October air clung to his jacket, and he could still see his breath in the dim back hallway. This was his third night on the job, and he was still getting used to the strange rhythm of working while the rest of the world slept. The building felt different at night, transformed from a bustling marketplace into something else entirely, something hollow and waiting. His supervisor, Tom Reynolds, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a permanent slouch, met him at the time clock. Tom had the look of someone who'd seen too many overnight shifts, his skin pale under the harsh lighting, deep circles etched beneath his eyes like bruises. He barely made eye contact as he handed Alex a clipboard with a night's checklist. "Same routine as yesterday," Tom muttered, his voice rough from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "Start with the grocery aisles. Work your way to electronics. Finish with the front end. Should take you until about 6 if you keep moving." He paused, scratching at the stubble on his jaw. "And Alex, just stick to the list. Don't go looking for extra work. We don't pay you enough for that." There was something odd in the way Tom said it, an emphasis on those last words that made Alex's stomach tighten slightly. But he nodded, took the clipboard, and headed toward the supply closet to gather his equipment. The mop bucket's wheels squeaked against the polished floor, echoing through the empty corridors in a way that made the space feel even more cavernous than it was during business hours. By midnight, the store was completely empty save for Alex and Tom, who disappeared into the manager's office shortly after the doors locked. The silence was profound, broken only by the constant electrical hum of refrigeration units and the occasional click of the heating system kicking on. Alex started in aisle 1, as instructed, methodically mopping the scuffed linoleum between shelves stocked with cereal boxes and breakfast items. The work itself was mindless, almost meditative. Push the mop forward, pull it back, wring it out, repeat. Alex found his thoughts drifting as he worked, thinking about his apartment lease, his student loans, the band he used to play bass in before everyone moved away. This job wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than his previous gig at the gas station, and the night shift came with a decent differential. Besides, he'd always been something of a night owl. While most people found the late hours draining, Alex felt oddly energized after dark. But there was something unsettling about the store at night that he couldn't quite articulate. During the day, Walmart was a place of constant motion and noise. Families pushing carts, kids crying, employees restocking shelves, the beeping of checkout scanners creating a chaotic symphony. Stripped of all the human activity, the building revealed its true proportions. The aisles stretched impossibly long, vanishing into fluorescent infinity. The ceilings seemed higher, the shadows in the corners deeper. Every sound Alex made, the slosh of water in his bucket, his footsteps, even his breathing, felt amplified and intrusive, as though he were disturbing something that preferred to remain undisturbed. Around 1 a.m., as Alex finished the grocery section and moved toward household goods, he noticed something strange. A display of paper towels in aisle 7 had been knocked over, packages scattered across the floor in a wide arc. He frowned, pausing mid-stride. He'd mopped this aisle less than an hour ago, and it had been pristine. Tom was still in the office. He could see the light under the door from here. So who had knocked it over? Alex spent 15 minutes res-tacking the display, his unease growing with each package he picked up. The paper towels were heavy, industrial-sized bundles. It would take considerable force to knock over the entire display. He looked around the empty aisle, half expecting to see someone, but there was nothing, just the endless rows of products and the oppressive quiet. He returned to his cart, and continued working. But his attention was no longer on the task. Instead, he found himself listening intently to every small sound. The store was full of them, he realized. Faint creaks and groans, the whisper of air through ventilation ducts, distant thuds that could have been the building settling or could have been something else entirely. His rational mind knew that large buildings made noise, especially at night when temperature changes caused materials to expand and contract. But there was a part of him, some primal instinct, that insisted these sounds had purpose and intention behind them. At 2:30 a.m., Alex took his first break in the employee lounge, a windowless room with a scarred table, mismatched chairs, and a vending machine that hummed ominously in the corner. He'd brought a sandwich from home, but his appetite had faded. Instead, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media, desperate for some connection to the world of daylight and normalcy. The lounge door was propped open, giving him a clear view down the main corridor. As he sat there, sandwich untouched, he saw something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, no more than 2 seconds, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Tall and dark, perfectly still, watching him. Alex blinked, and the figure was gone, or had never been there at all. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his phone. He was overtired, that was all. The night shift was playing tricks with his perception. He'd read about this, how isolation and unusual sleep schedules could cause minor hallucinations. Nothing to worry about, just his brain adjusting to the new routine. But when he returned to work, pushing his cart toward the electronics department, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. It was a physical sensation, a prickling at the back of his neck, a heaviness in the air behind him. Several times he spun around, certain he would catch someone watching, but the aisles remained empty. The cameras, small black domes mounted on the ceiling every 30 feet, seemed to track his movement. Of course they did. That was their purpose. But tonight they felt different, more attentive somehow, as though something was watching through those glass eyes with unusual interest. The electronics section was darker than the rest of the store. Several ceiling lights had burned out, creating pools of shadow between the illuminated areas. The television displays were all turned off, their black screens reflecting Alex's distorted image as he passed. He worked quickly here, eager to move on to better lit areas, his mop sloshing water across the floor in rapid strokes. That's when he heard it, a sound from the video game aisle, 3 rows over. A distinct click, like a game case being opened and closed. Alex froze, water dripping from his mop onto the floor. He listened, barely breathing. Nothing. Then, after 10 seconds of silence, another click, then another. "Tom," Alex called out, his voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast space. "That you?" No response. The clicking stopped. Alex abandoned his cart and walked slowly toward the game aisle, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned the corner, half expecting to find Tom playing a prank, or maybe a homeless person who'd hidden in the store before closing. But the aisle was empty. The game cases were all in their proper places. Neat rows of colorful covers featuring soldiers and race cars and cartoon characters. Nothing was out of place. Nothing at all, except for one small detail that Alex almost missed. On the floor, in the exact center of the aisle, was a single game case. He recognized it immediately, an old horror title that had been popular a few years back. The case was open, the disc removed, and inside, tucked where the manual should have been, was a folded piece of paper. Alex picked up the case with trembling fingers and pulled out the paper. It was yellowed and soft, as though it had been handled many times. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, written in blue ink that had faded to gray in places. What he read made his mouth go dry. The note contained a list, but it wasn't a grocery list or a to-do list. It was something else entirely, something that made absolutely no sense, yet filled him with immediate dread. The heading, underlined twice, read, "Rules for Survival." Below there were 10 numbered items, each one stranger and more unsettling than the last. Don't mop aisle 13 between 2 and 3 a.m. Never count the shopping carts in the front vestibule. If you hear music playing from the garden center, walk in the opposite direction. If someone calls your name, don't answer unless you can see who's speaking. The televisions and electronics must remain off. Do not enter the storage freezer alone. Close your eyes when passing the mirrors and home decor between midnight and 4 a.m. If you find products arranged in a circle, do not step inside. Never acknowledge what you see in the parking lot through the front windows. Always leave before sunrise. At the bottom of the page, in different handwriting, shakier and more desperate, someone had added an 11th rule. Whatever you do, don't let them know you can see them. Alex read the list 3 times, each reading making him feel colder. This had to be a joke, some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. Tom probably wrote it himself, left it here as a test to see if Alex would fall for it. But even as he tried to convince himself of this rational explanation, his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. He folded the paper and shoved it into his pocket, then carefully returned the game case to its proper spot on the shelf. His hands were shaking now, and sweat had begun to form on his forehead despite the store's chilly temperature. He needed to talk to Tom, to ask him directly about this ridiculous list and get some answers. But when Alex returned to the main corridor, cartwheels squeaking in the oppressive silence, he noticed something that stopped him cold. Tom's office light was off. The small window in the door showed only darkness. Alex checked his phone. 3:15 a.m. Tom's shift didn't end until 6, same as his own. There was no reason for the office to be dark. Alex approached the door slowly, a sense of wrongness growing with each step. He knocked softly, then louder. No response. He tried the handle. Locked. He pressed his face to the window, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer into the darkness. For a long moment, he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted, and he realized the office wasn't empty. Tom was there, sitting at the desk, perfectly still. His head was tilted back, facing the ceiling, his mouth open slightly. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, as far as Alex could tell. But his eyes were open, reflecting the faint light from the hallway, and they were staring at something Alex couldn't see. Alex stumbled backward, his heart racing. This wasn't right. None of this was right. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands, ready to dial 911, when Tom's head suddenly snapped forward. His eyes found Alex through the window, and he smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a terrible secret and was enjoying Alex's ignorance. Tom stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural, and walked to the door. The lock clicked. The door opened. Tom stood in the doorway, that same unsettling smile on his face, and spoke in a voice that didn't quite sound like his own. "How's it going out there, Alex?" "Everything okay." Alex wanted to run. Every instinct was telling him to drop the mop bucket and sprint for the exit. But he forced himself to nod, to act normal, to pretend he hadn't just witnessed something deeply wrong. "Yeah," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's fine." "Good," Tom said, that smile never wavering. "Remember what I told you. Stick to the list. Don't go looking for extra work." He paused, his eyes boring into Alex's. "And don't pay attention to anything strange you might find. Old employees sometimes left things behind. Notes, warnings, silly superstitions. Best to ignore all that." "He knows," Alex thought. "He knows I found the list." "Sure thing, Tom," Alex replied, backing away slowly. "I'll just get back to work." Tom nodded and closed the door, and the office went dark again. Alex stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Then he looked down at his watch. 3:28 a.m. In 2 minutes, it would be 3:30. The paper in his pocket seemed to burn against his leg, reminding him of the first rule. Don't mop aisle 13 between 2 and 3 a.m. He'd been planning to start on aisle 13 next. Alex didn't mop aisle 13 that night. Instead, he moved his cart to the far end of the store, putting as much distance between himself and that particular section as possible. The list in his pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds, and every few minutes he found himself touching it through the fabric of his jeans, making sure it was still there, making sure he hadn't imagined the whole thing. The rest of the shift passed in a fog of anxiety. Alex went through the motions of cleaning, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Tom's unsettling smile, the way he'd sat in that dark office like a puppet with cut strings. By the time 6 a.m. rolled around and the first rays of dawn began creeping through the front windows, Alex had never been so grateful to see daylight in his life. Tom emerged from the office at 5:55, looking perfectly normal again. The strange, jerky quality to his movements had vanished, replaced by his usual tired shuffle. He checked Alex's work with a cursory glance, nodded his approval, and told him to clock out. There was no mention of the strange encounter, no acknowledgement of anything unusual. It was as if it had never happened. But Alex knew better. He felt the weight of the list in his pocket as he drove home through the early morning traffic, ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, unaware that places like the Boise Valley Walmart existed in a state of perpetual strangeness after dark. He barely slept that day, tossing and turning in his darkened bedroom while his mind churned through possibilities. Pranks, hazing, mental illness, carbon monoxide poisoning causing hallucinations. None of it felt right. When he returned for his fourth shift, Alex had made a decision. He would follow the rules on the list, at least for tonight. If nothing happened, if the night passed without incident, then he'd know it was all nonsense and he could laugh it off. But if something did happen, if the rules proved to have some basis in reality, then he'd quit. Simple as that. No job was worth whatever strange game was being played in this building. The night started normally enough. Tom gave him the same clipboard, the same instructions, the same warning to stick to the list and not look for extra work. But tonight, Alex noticed things he'd missed before. The way Tom wouldn't quite meet his eyes. The way his hand trembled slightly when he handed over the clipboard. The way he glanced over his shoulder toward the dark aisles, as though checking for something. "Tom," Alex said before his supervisor could disappear into the office. "How long have you worked the night shift here?" Tom paused, his hand on the office door. 12 years, he said quietly. "What? Just curious. That's a long time to work overnights." "Yeah." Tom's voice was hollow. "It is. Do you ever? Has anything weird ever happened during the night shifts?" For a moment, Tom's mask slipped. Fear flashed across his face, raw and genuine, before he forced it back under control. "No," he said, too quickly. "Nothing weird. It's just a store, Alex. Just products and floors and shelves. Nothing else." He went into the office and closed the door, ending the conversation. Alex began his rounds, but this time he paid attention to his surroundings with new intensity. The store revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals. He noticed that certain aisles felt colder than others, particularly aisle 13 and the frozen food section. He noticed that the mirrors and home decor, which the list had specifically warned about, were all positioned at odd angles, facing away from the main walkway rather than toward it. He noticed that there were exactly 13 security cameras in the main shopping area, and that one of them, the one positioned directly over aisle 13, had a crack in its dome that looked disturbingly like a human eye. At 12:30 a.m., while mopping the pharmacy area, Alex heard footsteps. Not the soft shuffle of sneakers or boots, but the distinct click-clack of high heels on linoleum. His blood went cold. The store was supposed to be empty except for him and Tom. He looked up, following the sound, and saw nothing. But the footsteps continued, walking down the main aisle, purposeful and steady. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. Alex pressed himself against a shelf of cold medicine, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps passed within 10 feet of his position, but he saw nothing. No person, no shadow, nothing but empty air and fluorescent light. The sound continued toward the back of the store, growing fainter until it finally faded entirely. Rule 4 echoed in his mind. If someone calls your name, don't answer unless you can see who's speaking. Did that apply to footsteps too? He didn't know, but he wasn't eager to find out. At 1:15 a.m., Alex was in the toy section when he heard a child's laughter. High and sweet, it rang out from somewhere near the board games. He froze, his mop held in both hands like a weapon. The laughter came again, closer now, playful and innocent. Every parental instinct told him to investigate, to make sure a child was okay. But he remembered the rules and stood perfectly still, waiting. The laughter moved through the toy aisles, weaving between the stuffed animals and action figures. At one point it came so close that Alex could have reached out and touched whoever was making it. But he kept his eyes fixed on his mop bucket, refusing to look, refusing to engage. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the laughter faded and disappeared. His hands were shaking so badly that he had to stop working and sit down on the floor, back against a shelf full of dolls with glassy, staring eyes. This was real. Whatever was happening in this store, it was real. The rules weren't a prank or hazing or superstition. They were survival instructions, passed down from one janitor to another, warnings about the things that walk these aisles after midnight. At 2 a.m., Alex's phone buzzed with a text message. The sudden sound and the oppressive silence made him jump, nearly dropping the device. The message was from an unknown number. You're doing well. Keep following the rules, especially Rule 7. Rule 7. Close your eyes when passing the mirrors and home decor between midnight and 4 a.m. Alex's mouth went dry. He'd been putting off the home decor section, dreading it, but he couldn't avoid it forever. It was on his checklist. Tom would notice if he skipped it entirely. He made his way to the home decor section slowly, his cartwheels squealing in protest. The aisle was dimly lit, several bulbs having burned out, and the mirrors lining both sides created an unsettling infinity effect. There were at least 20 mirrors of various sizes, all positioned to reflect each other, creating a hall of endless reflections that seemed to stretch into impossible distances. Alex stood at the entrance to the aisle, gathering his courage. The rules said to close his eyes while passing the mirrors. But how was he supposed to mop with his eyes closed? He'd trip over his own equipment, make a mess, draw attention to himself. No, he'd have to find another way. He decided to keep his eyes fixed firmly on the floor, looking at nothing but the linoleum 6 inches in front of his feet. He'd mop quickly, get it done and get out. Simple. He started down the aisle, eyes downcast, pushing the mop in steady strokes. That's when he heard the whisper. It came from his left, from one of the mirrors, a voice so faint he almost missed it beneath the squeak of his cartwheels. Alex. He almost looked. The urge was overwhelming, a physical compulsion to turn his head and see who had spoken. But he remembered Rule 4. Don't answer unless you can see who's speaking. And looking at a mirror didn't count as seeing them, did it? That was just a reflection, not the real thing. Alex, we've been waiting for you. Another voice, this one from his right, different than the first, deeper, with a wet quality that made his skin crawl. More voices joined in, a chorus of whispers from all around him. Alex, Alex, turn around. Alex, just one look. We want to show you something special, just for you. His eyes burned with the effort of keeping them fixed on the floor. Sweat ran down his face, stinging his eyes. The voices grew louder, more insistent, overlapping each other until they became a cacophony of desperate pleas and sinister promises. His reflection, he knew, must be showing in every mirror. But what else might be reflected there with him? What might be standing behind him, or beside him, or reaching out to touch him? The temperature dropped suddenly, his breath misting in front of his face. Something touched his shoulder, fingers cold as ice through the fabric of his shirt. Alex bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood, using the pain to focus, to keep himself from looking, from turning around, from breaking the rules. And then, mercifully, he was through. He pushed his cart past the last mirror and into the relative safety of the seasonal section, Halloween decorations leering down at him with painted grins that seemed warm and friendly compared to whatever had been in that aisle. Alex collapsed against his cart, gasping for breath, his entire body shaking. The whispers had stopped. The cold had lifted, but the sensation of those fingers on his shoulder remained, a phantom touch that made his skin crawl. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and looked at the text message again. "You're doing well. Keep following the rules." Who would send it? Tom? Someone else? Another janitor? Past or present? He typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. Someone who survived. Not everyone does. Check the supply closet. Second shelf from the top. Behind the bleach bottles. Alex didn't want to check the supply closet. He wanted to walk out of the store right now, get in his car, and drive as far from Boise as his gas tank would take him. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, pulled him toward the closet like a fish on a hook. The supply closet was in the back corridor, near the employee entrance. Alex flipped on the light and stepped inside, surrounded by shelves of cleaning chemicals, mop heads, and industrial-sized bottles of soap. He found the bleach on the second shelf from the top, just as the text had said. Behind the bottles, hidden from casual view, was another note. This one was longer than the first, written on several sheets of paper stapled together. The handwriting was different. Multiple people had contributed to this document. Alex began to read, and with each paragraph, his horror grew. The first page was titled History and Origin. It explained that the Boise Valley Walmart had been built in 1987 on the site of an old asylum that had burned down in 1952, killing 17 patients and 3 staff members. The asylum had been abandoned for 35 years before Walmart purchased the land, and during that time, it had become a local legend, a place where teenagers dared each other to spend the night, where homeless people reported strange encounters, where more than one person had simply vanished without explanation. When Walmart was constructed, the builders reported unusual incidents. Tools would go missing and reappear in impossible locations. Workers heard voices and saw shadows. 3 separate construction workers quit after claiming something had touched them or spoken to them. But the project continued because schedules and budgets don't care about ghost stories. The store opened in August of 1987 and operated normally for exactly 6 months. Then the first night shift janitor, a man named Robert Shun, disappeared. He clocked in at 11 p.m. and was never seen again. His mop cart was found in aisle 13, the mop still wet, water pooled on the floor, but Robert was gone. Security footage from that night showed him entering aisle 13 at 2:45 a.m. At 2:48 a.m., the cameras went dark for exactly 1 minute. When they came back online, Robert was gone. The police investigated, but found nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no body. Eventually, they concluded he'd run off for personal reasons, though his family insisted this was impossible. The case went cold. Robert was the first, but not the last. Over the next 5 years, 3 more night shift employees vanished under similar circumstances. All of them disappeared in aisle 13. All of them between 2 and 3 a.m. All during a 1-minute gap in security footage. After the 4th disappearance, the remaining night shift workers began to notice patterns. The surviving janitors, those who'd worked multiple shifts without incident, seemed to follow certain behaviors. They avoided specific areas at specific times. They didn't respond to strange sounds. They never looked in the mirrors after midnight. And most importantly, they never, ever went into aisle 13 between 2 and 3 a.m. Someone, the note didn't say who, started writing down these observations. The list of rules grew organically. Each one added after someone noticed a correlation between a specific action and either survival or disaster. The rules were refined over years, passed from one janitor to another like oral tradition, evolving and adapting based on trial and terrible error. The note concluded with a chilling statement. Management knows. They've always known. The disappearances stopped once janitors started following the rules, so they allow the rules to exist unofficially. It's cheaper than shutting down the store or addressing the actual problem. Just follow the rules, finish your shift, and don't ask questions. That's how you survive. Alex's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the papers. Management knew. Tom knew. Everyone knew. And they all kept working here, kept sending new employees into the darkness with nothing but a cryptic warning to stick to the list. He felt sick, betrayed, angry. But more than anything, he felt afraid. He carefully replaced the note behind the bleach bottles and left the supply closet. The stores seemed different now, malevolent in a way he could finally articulate. This wasn't just a building with strange quirks. It was a trap, a hunting ground, maintained and operated with full knowledge that something in these aisles claimed victims. The rest of the shift passed in a heightened state of awareness. Every sound made Alex flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. He followed the rules religiously, checking and rechecking the list in his pocket, making sure he didn't inadvertently violate one of the commandments that stood between him and disappearing forever. At 3 a.m., he received another text. You're in the parking lot rule. Don't look outside. Alex was near the front of the store, mopping the tile entrance area. The massive windows showed the parking lot, empty except for his car and Tom's truck under the yellow sodium lights. He'd been glancing outside periodically, a habit from his gas station days when watching for suspicious people was part of the job. But now he forced himself to keep his eyes inward, focused on the floor, on the shelves, on anything except those windows. But he could hear something outside, a scraping sound, like metal dragging across pavement. It grew louder, closer, until it was directly outside the windows. Alex kept his eyes fixed on his mop bucket, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. The scraping continued for several minutes, then stopped. In the glass, in his peripheral vision, he could see a reflection, something tall and wrong, standing on the other side of the window, looking in. Don't look, he whispered to himself. Don't look, don't look, don't look. The reflection didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting, testing him. The temperature near the windows dropped, frost forming on the glass in patterns that looked disturbingly like reaching hands. Alex continued mopping, moving along the wall, edging away from the windows while keeping his eyes averted. Finally, mercifully, the scraping sound resumed, moving away, fading into the distance. The frost on the windows melted. The presence was gone. Alex looked at his phone. 4:38 a.m. Less than 90 minutes until sunrise. He could make it. He had to make it. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue that comes before dawn, when Alex finally finished his checklist. Every task completed, every rule followed. He pushed his car back to the supply closet, stored his equipment, and clocked out at 5:58 a.m. Tom emerged from the office as Alex was gathering his things, looking haggard and older than his years. Good work tonight, Tom said, his voice flat. Same time tomorrow. Alex wanted to quit right there, to tell Tom exactly what he thought of a job that required following supernatural rules just to survive until morning. But something in Tom's eyes stopped him. It wasn't malice or indifference. It was resignation, the look of a man trapped in circumstances beyond his control, doing what he had to do to survive. Yeah, Alex heard himself say. Same time tomorrow. As he drove home through the strengthening dawn, Alex realized he'd made a terrible decision. He should have quit, should have walked away and never looked back. But the truth was, he needed this job. The pay was too good, his financial situation too desperate. And besides, He'd survived one night following the rules. He could survive another, and another after that. The rules would keep him safe. As long as he followed them, he'd be fine. At least, that's what he told himself. Alex's fifth night began with rain. Heavy drops hammered the parking lot as he pulled in, creating rivers that snaked between the painted lines and pooled around storm drains. The weather seemed appropriate somehow, as though even nature recognized that something was wrong with this place. He'd spent his day off researching the old asylum, finding references in newspaper archives and historical society records. The Idaho State Hospital for the Mentally Infirm, they called it, though locals had used less charitable names. Built in 1923, it had housed up to 200 patients at its peak. The conditions had been deplorable, even by the standards of the era. Overcrowding, experimental treatments, patients were strained for days at a time. The fire in 1952 had been ruled accidental, caused by faulty wiring in the East Wing, but rumors persisted that a patient had set it deliberately, choosing to burn rather than spend another day in that place. Now Alex stood in the employee entrance, shaking rain from his jacket, about to spend another night walking the floors built over that tragedy. The weight of history pressed down on him, made every breath feel labored. Tom was waiting with a clipboard, but tonight he looked different, more alert, almost nervous. His eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall, watching the minutes tick toward midnight. "Listen, Alex," Tom said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to be extra careful tonight. There's been activity, more than usual. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you seem like a smart kid, and I don't want—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "Just follow the rules. Don't deviate from your routine. And if something feels wrong, trust your instincts." "What kind of activity?" Alex asked, but Tom was already retreating to his office, closing the door, ending the conversation. Alex began his rounds with a sense of impending dread. The store felt different tonight, charged with an energy he couldn't quite name. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker more frequently. The background hum of machinery sounded almost like whispers, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like smoke from an old fire, though there was no visible source. He made it through the first hour without incident, working methodically through grocery and health and beauty. But at 1:15 a.m., while mopping the beverage aisle, Alex made his first mistake. He wasn't paying attention, his mind wandering to thoughts of bills and student loans, and he pushed his cart into aisle 13 without thinking. The moment his wheels crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. His breath came out in clouds. The lights at the far end of the aisle flickered once, twice, then went out entirely, leaving only the dim illumination from neighboring sections. And in that darkness, something moved. Alex's heart seized in his chest. He grabbed the handle of his cart and pulled it backward, but the wheels had locked. They wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, panic rising, but the cart remained frozen in place, as though it had been bolted to the floor. A sound came from the darkness at the end of the aisle. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward him. Not the click-clack of heels he'd heard before, but something heavier, dragging. Scrape thump, scrape thump, scrape thump. Alex abandoned the cart and backed away, his eyes locked on the darkness. A shape began to emerge from the shadows, tall and vaguely human, but wrong in proportions. Too thin, arms too long, head tilted in an impossible angle. It moved with a jerky, disjointed gait, like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. The rules said don't enter aisle 13 between 2 and 3 a.m., but it was only 1:15. Surely that meant he was safe, that the danger hadn't started yet. Except the thing moving toward him didn't seem to care about technicalities. It kept coming, scraping closer, and Alex could now see details he wished he couldn't. The figure wore what might have once been a hospital gown, tattered and stained. Its skin was gray, stretched tight over bones that jutted at wrong angles. And its face, God, its face was a horror of melted features, as though it had been caught in intense heat. The fire. one of the burned victims from the asylum fire. Alex ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and sprinted down the main corridor, his footsteps echoing through the empty store. Behind him, the scraping sound accelerated, matching his pace. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the thing had reached the end of aisle 13, was turning to follow him, moving faster than something so damaged should be able to move. He ducked into the clothing section, weaving between racks of shirts and jeans, trying to lose his pursuer. The scraping sound grew fainter, then stopped entirely. Alex pressed himself against a display of winter coats, breathing hard, listening. Silence. Just the ever-present hum of the store's systems and his own ragged gasps. Minutes passed. 5. Then 10. Alex's heart rate slowly returned to normal. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe exhaustion and paranoia had finally caught up with him, creating hallucinations from shadows and normal sounds. He was about to emerge from his hiding spot when his phone buzzed. The text was from the unknown number. You violated Rule 1. Now they know you can see them. Rule 11 is broken. You need to leave. Now. Alex's blood turned to ice. Rule 11, the one added in different handwriting at the bottom of the original list. Whatever you do, don't let them know you can see them. By running, by reacting, he'd reveal that he could perceive the things that haunted this store, and that changed everything. He pulled up Tom's number and called. It rang 6 times before it went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Tom wasn't answering, which meant either he couldn't or wouldn't help. Alex was on his own. The employee entrance was at the back of the store, past electronics, past the storage rooms, through a warren of corridors. Alex emerged from the clothing section cautiously, looking both ways before stepping into the main aisle. The store looked normal, fluorescent bright, and empty, giving no sign of the horror that had just chased him. But appearances were deceiving here. He knew that now. He started toward the back, moving quickly but quietly, trying not to draw attention. He made it past sporting goods, past toys, past the pharmacy. The employee corridor was just ahead, 50 feet, and he'd be safe. He could see the exit sign glowing red, promising escape. That's when all the lights went out. Complete darkness fell like a curtain, so absolute that Alex couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. Emergency lights should have kicked in, battery backups that were code required, but nothing happened. The store was utterly, impossibly black. And in that darkness, voices began to speak. They came from all directions, overlapping, creating a discordant chorus of suffering. Help me. It hurts. Why won't it stop burning? Please make it stop. I can't see. Where am I? Help me. Alex stood frozen, afraid that any movement would give away his position. But then he felt something brush against his arm, fingers light as cobwebs, and he couldn't help but cry out. The sound seemed to excite the voices, which grew louder, more insistent. He can hear us. He knows we're here. Make him help. Make him stay. We're so lonely, so cold. We've been waiting so long. Hands touched him from every direction now, dozens of them, pulling at his clothes, his hair, his skin. They were ice cold, some solid, and some insubstantial as mist. Alex thrashed, trying to break free, but there were too many. They were dragging him backward, away from the exit, deeper into the store. Then, suddenly, light blazed from his pocket. His phone, the screen illuminating automatically, casting a small circle of brightness. The hands recoiled, the voices shrieking in surprise or pain. Alex didn't hesitate. He pulled out the phone and held it high, using it as a torch, sweeping the light around him. The beam revealed figures surrounding him, translucent and flickering, their forms unstable. Patients from the asylum, he realized, still wearing the clothes they died in, their bodies showing the trauma of their final moments. Burns, mostly flesh blackened and peeling, but also signs of other violence. Restraint marks, bruises, Surgical scars. These weren't malevolent entities hunting for sport. They were victims, trapped in this place, suffering even in death. But knowledge of their tragedy didn't make them less dangerous. They reached for him again, and he ran, phone held high, its light creating a bubble of safety around him. The figures fell back, but followed, a parade of the dead shambling in his wake. He burst through the employee entrance doors and into the back corridor, the phone's light bouncing crazily off white cinder block walls. The exit was 30 feet ahead, the door with the crash bar that led to the parking lot and freedom. He could see rain through the small window, promising escape. Something dropped from the ceiling directly in front of him, landing in a crouch. This one was different from the others, more solid, more present. It wore the remnants of a doctor's coat, and its face was twisted in an expression of rage and madness. Unlike the burned patients, this one bore no fire damage. Instead, its skull was caving on one side, dark fluid leaking from the wound. "You shouldn't see us," it hissed, its voice like gravel in a blender. "The rules exist for a reason, to keep you blind, to keep you safe. But you looked, you acknowledged. Now you're one of us." It lunged. Alex threw himself sideways, crashing into a shelving unit full of supplies. Bottles and boxes rained down, clattering across the floor. He scrambled his feet and ran in the opposite direction, away from the exit, deeper into the back areas of the store. The doctor thing pursued, impossibly fast, its footsteps heavy despite its translucent form. Alex found himself in the storage area, a vast space filled with pallets of products waiting to be stocked. The ceiling was higher here, industrial lights hanging from chains, all of them dark. His phone's beam seemed pathetically small in the cavernous space. He ducked behind a pallet of paper towels, tried to catch his breath, trying to think. The doctor's footsteps echoed through the storage area, methodical and patient. It was hunting him, and it had all night to do so. The sun wouldn't rise for hours. "You can't hide forever," the doctor's voice called out, bouncing off metal shelving. "This is our place now. Has been for 70 years. The living don't belong here after dark. You should have followed the rules. They were designed to keep you invisible to us. But now we see you, and we're so very hungry for life." Alex's hands were shaking as he pulled up his phone's message app. He sent a desperate text to the unknown number. "Help. They're after me. I'm in the storage area. Please." The response came seconds later. "The only way out is through the freezer. It's the oldest part of the building, built over the asylum's chapel. They can't enter. Hide there until sunrise." The storage freezer. Alex remembered it from his first night, a massive walk-in unit where they stored frozen goods that didn't fit in the sales floor freezers. The list had warned never to enter it alone, but alone seemed better than being chased by a dead doctor with murder in its eyes. He checked his map app, oriented himself, and realized the freezer was on the opposite side of the storage area. He'd have to cross open space, expose himself, but there was no other option. Alex took 3 deep breaths, gathering courage, then burst from behind the pallet and ran. The doctor spotted him immediately, releasing a howl that raised every hair on Alex's body. Other voices answered from elsewhere in the store, a pack of predators coordinating their hunt. He ran between towering stacks of inventory, his phone's light showing only fragments of the path ahead. Twice he nearly tripped over debris on the floor. Once he crashed shoulder first into a support post, the impact sending lightning bolts of pain down his arm. But he kept moving, driven by pure survival instinct. The freezer's door appeared ahead, a massive steel rectangle with a wheel lock. Alex grabbed the wheel and spun it, praying it wasn't locked. The mechanism turned, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. He threw himself inside and slammed it shut behind him, spinning the internal lock just as something heavy crashed against the other side. The impact shook the door, but the lock held. More impacts followed, a furious drumbeat of frustrated rage. Alex backed away from the door, his breath misting in the frigid air. The freezer was larger than he'd expected, stretching back into darkness beyond the reach of his phone's light. The temperature was well below zero, and he was wearing only his janitor's polo shirt and jeans. He'd freeze to death if he stayed in here until sunrise. But freezing was still better than whatever waited outside. The pounding on the door continued for several minutes, then stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the freezer's cooling system. Alex's teeth were already chattering, his exposed skin burning with cold. He pulled out his phone to check the time and felt his heart sink. 2:35 a.m., 3.5 hours until sunrise. He'd never last that long. He used his phone's light to explore the freezer, looking for anything he could use for warmth. The space was filled with metal shelving units holding pallets of frozen food, frost-covered boxes creating an Arctic landscape. At the back, partially hidden behind a stack of frozen turkeys, he found something unexpected: a sleeping bag, a lantern, a small propane heater, and a notebook. Someone had used this space before, prepared for exactly this situation. Alex set up the heater with numb fingers, the little flame providing blessed warmth. He wrapped himself in the sleeping bag and opened the notebook. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. If you're reading this, you broke the rules like I did. Welcome to the freezer. It's the only safe place during a hunt. The things outside can't enter because this was built over the asylum's chapel. Sacred ground, maybe, or maybe just too many prayers soaked into the foundation. Either way, you're safe here. Just cold. Alex flipped through the pages, reading entries from different people, different nights when janitors had taken refuge in this frozen sanctuary. Each entry told a similar story: rules broken, things seen, desperate flight ending in this metal box. Most entries ended with "I quit," or "never going back," or "find another job. This isn't worth it." But one entry, dated 6 months ago, was different. It was longer, more detailed, and it explained something that made Alex's blood run colder than the temperature around him. "I figured it out," the entry began. "Why management knows, but doesn't shut down the store. Why they keep hiring for night shift despite the disappearances. Why the rules exist, but are never officially acknowledged. It's not just about money or covering up liability. It's about feeding them. The things in this store, the patients and staff who died in the asylum fire, they're trapped here, bound to this location. But they're not passive ghosts going about phantom routines. They're active, aware, and they're hungry, not for blood or flesh, but for life force, for the energy of the living. That's why people disappear. They're not killed in any conventional sense. They're consumed, drained, until there's nothing left but another ghost to add to the collection. But here's the key. They can only fully consume someone who acknowledges them, someone who sees them and reacts. The rules exist to keep night shift workers blind to their presence. As long as you don't see them, don't react to them, you're just background noise. You're in their space, but not really interacting with it. You're safe. But once you see them, once you let them know you perceive their existence, you become real to them, substantial, consumable. That's what Rule 11 means. Don't let them know you can see them, because that's what transforms you from observer to prey. Management knows this. They know that as long as janitors follow the rules, they're mostly safe. And the few who don't follow the rules, who break down and see what they shouldn't see, well, those disappearances keep the entities fed, satisfied. If the store went dark, if it closed down completely, the entities would be starving. Who knows what they might do then? Well, they might spread. It's containment, I think. Keep them fed just enough to keep them docile. Keep them confined to this building. Sacrifice a few workers every few years to prevent something worse. If you're reading this, you've already been seen. There's no going back from that. Your options are limited. Survive until sunrise and quit immediately, or become one of them. Choose wisely. The entry wasn't signed, but at the bottom someone had added in different handwriting, "He didn't survive." Found his car in the parking lot 2 days later, keys still in the ignition. Never found a body. Alex closed the notebook with trembling hands. The propane heater cast flickering shadows on the metal walls. And even here, in this supposedly safe space, he felt watched. His phone showed 3:47 a.m., still over 2 hours until sunrise. He became aware of a sound, faint but growing louder. Singing. Multiple voices, harmonizing in a melody that might have been beautiful once, but was now discordant and wrong. It came from beyond the freezer door, filling the storage area, seeping through the metal walls. Alex recognized the tune after a moment. A hymn, something that might have been sung in the asylum's chapel before the fire, when there were still services, when the patients still had hope. The singing grew louder, more insistent, and with it came the sensation of pressure, as though the air itself was being compressed. The freezer's lights flickered, even though the unit had its own power supply. Frost began to form on the interior walls in patterns that looked disturbingly like reaching hands, screaming faces, bodies consumed by flames. They couldn't enter the freezer, the notebook had said, but that didn't mean they couldn't try to drive him out. The temperature dropped further. Alex's heater provided only a small bubble of warmth, and even that seemed to be fading. His breath came in gasps that turned to ice crystals in the air. His fingers and toes were going numb despite the sleeping bag. Hypothermia was setting in faster than it should have, as though the cold was being weaponized, used against him. The singing reached a crescendo, dozens of voices screaming the hymn in unison, and then suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. Alex strained his ears, listening for any sound that might tell him what was happening outside. Then he heard it, scratching, all around the freezer, on every surface, countless fingers scraping against metal. They were covering the entire exterior, he realized, coating it with their presence like a cocoon, testing every inch, looking for any weakness, any gap they could exploit. One of the scratching sounds came from directly above his head. Alex looked up and saw something that made his heart stop. The ventilation grate, built into the ceiling to prevent the freezer from becoming airtight, had gaps large enough for something thin to squeeze through. And in the darkness beyond the grate, he could see movement. Pale, skeletal fingers working at the metal slats, try to pry them loose. He grabbed his phone and sent another message to the unknown number. They're trying to get in through the vents. What do I do? No response. He tried calling Tom again. Still no answer. He was truly alone, trapped in a metal box with things from a nightmare, working to breach his sanctuary. The grate groaned under the assault. One of the screws popped free, clattering to the floor. Then another. The fingers worked faster, more frantically, and Alex could hear breathing now, raspy and wet, coming from multiple sources in the ventilation system. He looked around desperately for anything he could use to defend himself or block the vent. The frozen food wasn't going to help. The heater was too small. But then he spotted something wedged behind the shelving unit. A metal rod, probably a piece of the shelving hardware that had broken off. Alex grabbed the rod and positioned himself under the grate, rod held high like a spear. The fingers had almost worked all the screws loose now. The grate was hanging by a single bolt, swaying slightly as things pushed against it from above. His phone buzzed. The unknown number. Recite the Lord's Prayer. Out loud. They're bound by the chapel's rules. Holy words still have power there. Alex wasn't religious. Hadn't been to church since childhood, but his grandmother had made him memorize prayers, and the words came back now, rusty but intact. He began to speak, his voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The scratching stopped. The breathing hitched. The fingers withdrew slightly. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The grate stopped swaying. The pressure in the air lessened. Alex continued, speaking the prayer over and over, and with each repetition, he felt the presence outside the freezer retreating, not leaving entirely, but pulling back, unable to maintain their assault against the sacred words spoken in what had once been holy ground. He prayed until his voice was hoarse, until his phone showed 5:30 a.m., until he saw through the small window in the freezer door that the storage area lights had come back on. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the end of the entity's hunting time. At 5:55, Alex finally dared to unlock the freezer door and peer outside. The storage area looked normal, just metal shelving and pallets of products. No sign of the supernatural siege that had just occurred. He emerged slowly, the metal rod still clutched in his hand, ready for any final attack. Nothing. The store was silent except for the familiar hum of machinery. He made his way through the storage area, past the employee corridor where the doctor thing had cornered him, and into the main store. Everything was exactly as it should be, clean and bright and empty. Tom's office light was on. The door opened, and Tom stepped out, looking at Alex with an expression of profound sadness. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Alex replied, his voice barely a whisper. "And you survived." Tom sounded almost surprised. That's good. That's rare." He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "You're going to quit, aren't you?" Alex thought about the cold metal of the freezer, the fingers reaching through the vent, the faces of the dead pressed against the door. He thought about spending another night in this place, knowing what he knew, seeing what he could see. The smart choice was obvious, but then he thought about his rent, his loans, his empty bank account. He thought about the other janitors who'd survived, who'd learned to navigate this nightmare and made it work. He thought about the sleeping bag and heater someone had stashed in the freezer, provisions left by survivors for those who came after. "I don't know," he said finally. "I need to think about it." Tom nodded slowly. "Take tomorrow night off. Paid. Think it over. If you come back." He trailed off, then met Alex's eyes directly. "If you come back, I'll teach you how to really survive here. The written rules are just the beginning. There's more you need to know." Alex clocked out and walked to his car through the dawn light, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on his face like a blessing. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands on the wheel, not starting the engine. Through the windshield, he could see the Walmart, just a building now in the daylight, giving no hint of what it became after dark. His phone buzzed one last time. The unknown number. "You did well. The freezer trick works, but you can't rely on it every time. If you're coming back, meet me at the coffee shop on Morrison Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. There's a lot you need to learn. And congratulations. You're one of us now." Alex stared at the message for a long time. Then he started his car and drove home, the question hanging in his mind like a weight. Would he go back? Alex didn't sleep that day. He tried, lying in his darkened bedroom with the curtains drawn, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the burned faces of the asylum patients, felt the cold fingers touching his skin, heard the discordant singing. Eventually, he gave up and spent the day researching, diving deeper into the history of the Idaho State Hospital for the mentally infirm. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. The asylum hadn't just been negligent or overcrowded. It had been a place of deliberate cruelty, experiments conducted under the guise of treatment. Hydrotherapy that was essentially torture by water. Insulin shock therapy. Lobotomies performed with ice picks through the eye socket. Patients left in restraints for weeks, developing bed sores that went septic. The staff had included several doctors whose licenses were later revoked. Men who'd been kicked out of prestigious hospitals and ended up in Idaho, where oversight was lax and the patients had no advocates. The fire hadn't been an accident. Alex found a newspaper article from 1953, a year after the blaze, that referenced an investigation suggesting arson. The prime suspect had been Dr. Martin Whalen, a psychiatrist who disappeared the night of the fire and was never seen again. Witnesses reported seeing him in the building as it burned, walking through the flames as patients screamed, making no effort to help them escape. Some claimed he'd been smiling. Alex thought of the doctor thing that had chased him, the one with the caved-in skull. Had that been Whalen? And if so, wig caved in his head. Had one of the patients managed to fight back before dying? At 1 p.m., Alex showered and dressed, his body moving on autopilot. He still hadn't decided if he was going back to the Walmart, but he was curious about the mystery texter, this person who seemed to know everything about the store's secrets. The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, and Alex found a corner table where he could watch the door. At 2:05, a woman walked in. She was in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of deep-set exhaustion in her eyes that spoke of years dealing with trauma. She scanned the room, spotted Alex, and made her way over. "You're the new guy," she said, sitting down without asking. "Tom texted me your description. I'm Angela Reeves. You're the one who's been sending me messages." "That's me." She signaled to the barista for coffee. "I worked night shift at that store for 8 years. Left about 6 months ago when I finally saved enough to get out of town. But I keep tabs on the new hires. Try to help the ones who are smart enough to survive. Why didn't you warn me before I took the job?" Angela's expression darkened. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was crazy and taken the job anyway? The only way people learn about that place is by experiencing it. I just try to make sure they survive the learning process." The barista brought coffee, and Angela took a long sip before continuing. "You broke Rule 11. That's not a death sentence, but it makes everything harder. The entities know you can see them now. They'll test you, push boundaries, try to break you down until you make a fatal mistake. But there are ways to manage it, strategies that go beyond the basic rules. Why isn't any of this in the notebooks? The one in the supply closet, the one in the freezer?" "Because management occasionally finds those notebooks and destroys them. They can't stop us from passing down information entirely, but they try to limit it. The more you know, the more dangerous you are to their arrangement." Angela leaned forward. "Do you understand what's really happening there? Why Walmart Corporate keeps the store open despite everything?" The notebook in the freezer said something about containment, feeding them to keep them confined. Close, but not quite complete. Angela pulled out her phone and showed Alex a document, some kind of corporate memo. "I used to date a guy who worked in regional management. He let me see this before I quit. It's an internal risk assessment from 2003, evaluating whether to close the Boise Valley location." Alex read the memo, his disbelief growing with each paragraph. Walmart's corporate division had done a full investigation after the 4th disappearance. They brought in specialists, people who dealt with exactly these kinds of situations, though the memo never used words like ghosts or haunted. Instead, it referenced environmental psychological factors and location-specific personnel retention challenges. The conclusion was chilling in its pragmatism. Closing the store would be expensive, cost millions in lost revenue and write-offs. But more importantly, the specialists had warned that the entities were bound to the physical location. As long as the building stood and maintained some level of human activity, the entities remained contained. If the building was demolished, there was a significant risk the entities would disperse into the surrounding area. Better to keep them concentrated, keep them fed just enough to maintain stability, and accept a certain level of personnel attrition as an acceptable business cost. "They know," Alex said, feeling sick. "They know people die there, and they don't care. They care about liability and profit margins," Angela corrected. "That's why there are no official rules. Everything is off the books, passed person to person. If someone disappears, it's just an employee who walked off the job. No wrongful death suits, no OSHA investigations. The night shift pay is high enough to keep applicants coming despite the reputation. This is insane. We should go to the media, expose this." Angela laughed bitterly. "With what evidence? Ghost stories? The corporate memo I can't prove is real because I shouldn't have seen it? Look, I tried. Went to a local news station. They laughed me out of the building. Without bodies. Without concrete proof. We're just conspiracy theorists. And anyone who survives long enough to gather evidence is too traumatized or too broke to do anything with it. Alex felt the weight of hopelessness settling over him. So we just, keep working there? Keep feeding people to those things? No, Angela said firmly. We survive, save money, and get out. That's the only winning move. But in the meantime, we help the ones who come after us. That's why I'm here. To teach you what I know, so you have a better chance. For the next 2 hours, Angela revealed the deeper rules, the ones that didn't make it into the notebooks. She explained that the entities operated on a hierarchy. The burn patients were lower level, dangerous in numbers, but relatively weak individually. They could be avoided or driven off with light, prayer, or simple determination. The doctor entities were more powerful, smarter, capable of strategy. They couldn't be fought directly, but could be evaded if you understood their patterns. But there was something else. Angela explained, something at the top of the hierarchy. The administrator, the entity that coordinated the others, that set the rules and enforced them. It had been the asylum's director, a man named Charles Blackwood, who'd been in his office when the fire started. He'd burned to death while locked inside, unable to escape because he'd installed extra locks to prevent patients from accessing the building's records. Blackwood is the one you really need to avoid, Angela said, her voice dropping to a near whisper despite the coffee shop's ambient noise. He doesn't hunt like the others. He's calculating, patient. He'll watch you for weeks, learning your patterns, finding your weaknesses. And when he strikes, it's not random. It's surgical. How do I recognize him? You'll know, Angela said grimly. He looks normal, not burned or damaged like the others. He wears a suit, carries a clipboard, looks like any middle-aged administrator. But his eyes are wrong, completely black, no whites at all, and he smells like paper and smoke. If you see him, don't run. That triggers his hunting instinct. Just walk away calmly, like you don't notice him. Get to the freezer or the employee lounge, anywhere with multiple entrances so you're not cornered. Angela's phone rang. She checked it and frowned. I have to go. Work. She stood, then paused. One more thing. Tom Reynolds. He's been there 12 years, like he told you. You know how he survived that long? He has an arrangement with them. What kind of arrangement? He feeds them information, tells them about new employees, who's following the rules, and who isn't, who might be vulnerable. In exchange, they leave him alone. He's not evil exactly, just pragmatic. Survival at any cost. Don't trust him completely. After Angela left, Alex sat alone with his coffee, mind churning through everything he'd learned. The smart play was obvious. Don't go back. Find another job, any other job, even if it paid less. But unemployment was high. His savings were non-existent, and he'd already invested a week in this position. Quitting meant starting over, going through the application and interview process again, possibly being unemployed for months. Besides, there was a part of him, small but growing, that was curious. He'd survived his first real encounter with the entities. He had knowledge now, information that made him less vulnerable. And there was something almost addictive about the fear, the way it made every moment feel sharp and vital. His life had been drifting for years, meaningless work to paying meaningless bills. But in that freezer, reciting prayers while things clawed at the vents, he'd felt truly alive for the first time in memory. He went back that night. Tom seemed unsurprised when Alex clocked in at 11:45, though there might have been a flicker of disappointment in his expression. Glad you're back, Tom said, and it sounded sincere. Listen, after what happened last night, I think you should know more. The rules help, but they're not enough once you've been seen. You need to understand the layout better, know where the safe zones are. Tom pulled out a blueprint of the store, old and faded, showing the original footprint from 1987. He pointed to various sections. The freezer you already know about, built over the chapel. Then there's the employee lounge, which sits where the asylum's entrance used to be. Public space, threshold between worlds. They can enter, but they don't like to. It takes energy. The manager's office is safe too, built where the asylum's records room was. Blackwood died there, so it's his territory. The others won't enter without permission. Angela told me about Blackwood, Alex said. Tom's expression hardened. Angela should mind her own business. She got out. She should stay out. He sighed. But yeah, Blackwood is the real danger. The others are violent, but simple. Blackwood is something else. He still thinks he's running an institution. Still thinks he's maintaining order. The rules exist because of him. He created them, established them with the other entities. As long as night shift workers follow the rules, we're like patients following facility regulations. Compliant, non-threatening. But once you break the rules, become a disruption. He treats you like a patient who needs to be corrected or eliminated. Tom rolled up the blueprint. Here's what you need to understand. Blackwood isn't mindlessly evil. He's logical. He believes he's doing necessary work, maintaining control over his facility. If you can convince him you're an orderly, not a patient, someone helping maintain his system, you can coexist with him. How do I do that? Follow the rules perfectly. Report violations when you see them. Don't try to help the other entities or interact with them. Treat the store like a functioning institution that needs to be kept clean and orderly. Become part of the system instead of a victim of it. It was twisted logic, but Alex understood. Blackwood was caught in a loop, repeating his role as administrator for eternity. If Alex could fit into that narrative as staff rather than patient, he might avoid becoming a target. The shift started normally, Alex working through his checklist with meticulous attention to the rules. But tonight was different. Now that he'd been seen, now that his eyes were truly open, he could perceive things he'd missed before. Shadows that moved against the light, cold spots that followed him, the constant sensation of being watched by dozens of eyes. At 1 a.m., while mopping the pharmacy, Alex saw his first patient entity clearly. She stood at the end of the aisle, a young woman in a tattered gown, her arms covered in bruises and restraint marks. She wasn't threatening, just watching him with sad, empty eyes. Alex remembered Angela's advice. Don't engage, don't react. He continued mopping, moving efficiently down the aisle. As he approached the entity, she stepped aside, letting him pass. He didn't look at her directly, didn't acknowledge her existence, just did his job. When he finished the aisle and glanced back, she was gone. The night continued this way, a careful dance of awareness and deliberate ignorance. Alex saw them everywhere now, patients wandering the aisles, reliving their final hours. Some were burned, skin blackened and peeling. Others showed different traumas, heads split open, throats cut, bodies twisted in unnatural positions. Not all of them had died in the fire, Alex realized. Some had been killed before it, during it, by staff or other patients or themselves. The asylum had been a place of concentrated suffering, and all that pain had soaked into the ground, creating a reservoir of torment that the Walmart now floated upon like a boat on dark water. At 2:30 a.m., Alex was in electronics when he felt it, a profound change in the atmosphere, like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm. The ambient temperature fell 10 degrees in seconds. The fluorescent lights dimmed, and every entity in his peripheral vision stopped moving, stood at attention, turned to face the same direction. He was coming. Blackwood. Alex forced himself to keep mopping, to maintain his routine, even as every instinct screamed at him to run. He heard footsteps, measured and precise, approaching from the front of the store. Dress shoes on linoleum, click, 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 getting closer. The smell hit him next. Paper, old and yellowed, mixed with the acrid stench of smoke. Not fresh smoke, but the lingering smell of a fire long extinguished, preserved somehow in whatever passed for this entity's presence. The footsteps stopped 10 feet behind him. Alex continued mopping, his hands steady despite the terror coursing through his veins. He could see a reflection in the dark screen of a television display. A man in a gray suit, tall and thin, holding a clipboard. The figure stood perfectly still, watching him work. Employee 247, a voice said. It was calm, professional, with the clipped enunciation of someone who'd spent a lifetime giving orders. You've had an incident report filed against you. Rule violations on October 9th, 2025. Entering restricted Area 13 during prohibited hours. Acknowledging patient presence. Fleeing from staff supervision. Alex's throat was dry, but he managed to speak without his voice shaking. Yes, sir. It was my error. I was still learning the facility protocols. It won't happen again. A pause. The reflection in the television screen showed Blackwood, tilting his head, considering. New staff members often struggle with our procedures. The important thing is correction and compliance. Have you reviewed the facility handbook? Yes, sir. Multiple times. I understand the rules now. Excellent. The clipboard made a scratching sound, pen on paper. I'm upgrading your status from probationary to standard staff. You'll continue your duties under observation. 3 violations, and you'll be reclassified as a patient. Do you understand? Alex's blood ran cold. Reclassified as a patient. That's what happened to the people who disappeared. They weren't killed or consumed in any normal sense. They were absorbed into Blackwood's delusion, became permanent residents of his eternal asylum, trapped in the loop of suffering forever. I understand, sir, Alex said, keeping his tone respectful, subservient. Thank you for the clarification. Good. The footsteps resumed, walking away, fading into the distance. The temperature rose. The lights brightened. The other entities resumed their wandering. The moment had passed. Alex's legs nearly gave out. He grabbed his shelf for support, breathing hard. That had been close, closer than his encounter in aisle 13. Blackwood had been evaluating him, deciding whether he was worth keeping or should be disposed of. And apparently, Alex had said the right things. He pulled out his phone and texted Angela. Just met Blackwood. He called me employee 247. Said I'm on probation. What does that mean? Her response came quickly. It means you're in the system now. He's numbered you, filed you, made you part of his records. That's good and bad. Good because he sees you as staff, which means basic protection. Bad because he'll expect perfect compliance. 3 strikes, and you're a patient forever. Don't fuck up. The rest of the shift passed without major incident, though Alex was hyper-aware of Blackwood's presence. He never saw him again directly, but several times he caught glimpses of that gray suit in his peripheral vision, always distant, always watching. The administrator was keeping tabs on his new employee, making sure the work was done to standard. At 4 a.m., while cleaning the restrooms, Alex found something that made him pause. Scratched into the mirror above one of the sinks, barely visible, were words, "Help US. We're still here, still suffering. Please." Alex stared at the message, his heart aching. The entities weren't just monsters hunting the living. They were victims, trapped in their trauma, unable to move on. The burned patients weren't trying to kill him out of malice. They were desperately seeking help, trying to make the living understand their plight. Even their attempts to consume life force might be nothing more than a drowning person grabbing at a passing swimmer, not meaning harm, but unable to stop themselves. But what could he do? He was just a janitor trying to survive until sunrise. He couldn't perform exorcisms or conduct elaborate cleansing rituals. He didn't have the knowledge or resources to help dozens of tormented souls find peace. Or did he? An idea began forming, dangerous and probably stupid, but compelling. Angela had said the entities were bound to the physical location. The building itself was the anchor, built on ground soaked in suffering. But what if that anchor could be severed? What if the building was destroyed? Alex thought about the corporate memo Angela had shown him. Walmart wouldn't demolish the store because it would be expensive and might release the entities into the surrounding area. But what if it wasn't Walmart's choice? What if something forced their hand? He spent the remaining hours of his shift thinking, planning. By the time sunrise broke through the windows and Tom emerged from his office, Alex had made a decision. He was going to free the entities, one way or another. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. "Tom," Alex said as he clocked out, "those old asylum records, the ones about what happened here before the fire, do those still exist somewhere?" Tom's expression became guarded. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I want to understand what I'm dealing with. If I'm going to survive here long term, I need to know the whole story. Not just the rules, but why they exist. What really happened in 1952? Tom studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "There's a historical society downtown. They have an archive of old hospital records, including some from the asylum. But Alex, be careful. The more you know, the more you'll wish you didn't. Some knowledge makes things worse, not better. I'll take that risk." Over the next 3 days, Alex spent his daylight hours at the Historical Society, poring over boxes of old documents. What he found was horrifying. The Idaho State Hospital for the Mentally Infirm had been a chamber of horrors dressed up as medical treatment. Patient records detailed therapies that were nothing but torture. Ice baths that lasted hours, insulin injections that induced seizures, experimental surgeries performed without proper anesthesia. Dr. Martin Whalen had been the worst. His records showed a man obsessed with curing mental illness through increasingly extreme methods. He performed over 100 lobotomies, most without family consent. He'd pioneered a technique he called corrective restraint therapy, which involved binding patients in painful positions for days to reset their psychological frameworks. At least 15 patients had died directly from his treatments, and dozens more had been permanently damaged. Charles Blackwood, the administrator, had enabled all of it. Records showed he'd falsified inspection reports, hidden patient deaths, and even helped dispose of bodies when experiments went wrong. He and Whalen had been partners, two men who'd found in each other permission to indulge their darkest impulses under the guise of medical progress. The fire had started in Whalen's treatment room on the night of March 15th, 1952. According to the investigation report, Whalen had been conducting an unauthorized procedure on a patient named Robert Shun when something went wrong. The patient had somehow broken free, attacked Whalen, and in the struggle, knocked over a kerosene heater. The fire spread rapidly through the old wooden building. Whalen had tried to escape, but was trapped in the treatment room, the door jammed by fallen debris. He'd burned to death while his patients, locked in their rooms as per nighttime protocol, screamed for help that never came. Blackwood had died in his office, having run there to gather records rather than unlock the patient wards. By the time firefighters arrived, 17 patients and 3 staff members were dead. But here's what made Alex's blood run cold. One of the victims listed was Robert Shun, the same name as the first janitor who disappeared from the Walmart in 1988. That couldn't be coincidence. Shun had died in that building in 1952, and then 36 years later, someone with the same name had vanished while cleaning the store built on the asylum's grounds. Alex dug deeper and found more connections. Every janitor who disappeared shared a name with someone who died in the asylum. Different first names sometimes, but the same surnames. Shun, Rodriguez, Kim, O'Brien. It was as though the entities were trying to reclaim specific people, drawn to certain family lines or ethnic backgrounds that matched their own. Alex pulled out his phone and searched his own ancestry. His grandmother had been from Idaho, had lived in Boise in the 1940s, and her maiden name had been Harrison. His name, Alex Harrison. With shaking hands, he returned to the victim list from the fire and found it. Elizabeth Harrison, patient, age 19, died of smoke inhalation March 15, 1952. He was connected to this place. The entities hadn't randomly targeted him. They'd recognized something in him, some echo of one of their own. That's why the list had called to him. That's why he'd survived when he shouldn't have. He wasn't just employee 247 of Blackwood. He was the relative of a former patient, someone with a blood connection to the asylum's legacy. The revelation should have terrified him, but instead, it crystallized his resolve. Elizabeth Harrison had been 19 when she died, barely older than Alex was now. She'd been committed for hysteria, which in 1940s medical terminology could mean anything from depression to justifiable anger at an abusive situation. She'd spent 3 years in that hell before dying in the fire that finally ended it. She deserved peace. They all did. That evening, before his shift, Alex drove to a hunting supply store and made several purchases. Kerosene, matches, road flares. The clerk gave him an odd look, but said nothing. Idaho was hunting country, and these supplies could have a dozen legitimate uses. He also stopped at a hardware store and bought bolt cutters and a pry bar. Then he visited an electronics shop and purchased a small camera with a timer function. Whatever he was about to do, he wanted documentation, evidence that couldn't be denied or covered up. At 11:45 p.m., Alex clocked in for what he knew would be his last shift. Tom handed him the clipboard, and Alex could see the question in his supervisor's eyes. Tom knew something had changed, could probably sense that Alex had crossed some line from which there was no return. "Be careful tonight," Tom said quietly. "There's a storm coming. I can feel it." Alex nodded and began his rounds. But tonight, he wasn't following the checklist. Tonight, he was exploring, mapping out the building's structure, identifying key points. The store had multiple fire exits, but Alex knew from the blueprints that there were also sealed doors, remnants of the old asylum that had been built over, but not entirely demolished. At midnight, Alex went to the storage area and found one of these sealed doors, hidden behind a pallet of motor oil. He used the pry bar to break the seal, revealing a concrete stairwell leading down. The basement, the original foundation of the asylum, preserved beneath the Walmart's floor. Alex descended into darkness, using his phone's flashlight to navigate. The air was thick and stale, smelling of mold and something else, something organic and rotten. The basement was a maze of corridors and rooms, old cells with rusted doors hanging open, treatment rooms with crumbling plaster and ancient, horrifying equipment still bolted to the walls. This was where it had all happened. The torture, the experiments, the suffering that had soaked into the very bones of this place. Alex could feel the weight of it, generations of pain compressed into these underground spaces. The entities didn't just haunt the store above. Their true prison was down here, in the place where they'd actually suffered and died. In what must have been the main corridor of the asylum, Alex found something that confirmed his plan. The original structure was largely intact, wooden beams and supports that had been incorporated into the Walmart's foundation. Wood that was old, dry, and would burn easily. He set up his camera in a corner, angled to capture the corridor, and started the timer. Then he began placing the road flares and kerosene in strategic locations, creating a pattern that would ensure the fire spread quickly, but give him time to escape. As he worked, he became aware that he wasn't alone. The entities had followed him down, drawn by his presence in their original domain. They filled the corridor, dozens of them, watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hope to fear. The burned patients, the lobotomized victims, the restrained and the tortured, all of them waiting to see what he would do. And at the far end of the corridor stood Blackwood, clipboard in hand, his black eyes fixed on Alex with an intensity that made the air vibrate. "Employee 247, Blackwood's voice echoed through the basement. "You're in a restricted area. This is a violation of facility protocols." Alex stood up, facing the administrator directly for the first time. "My name is Alex Harrison. Elizabeth Harrison was my great-grandmother. She died here in 1952, trapped in a cell while this place burned around her. She was 19 years old, and she didn't deserve what happened to her. Blackwood's expression didn't change. Patient Harrison was diagnosed with hysteria and acute emotional instability. Her treatment was necessary and appropriate for the time. Her death was an unfortunate accident. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. You and Whalen killed these people through negligence, cruelty, and deliberate malice. And then you trapped them here, kept them suffering for 70 years because you couldn't let go of your sick need for control. I maintain order, Blackwood said, his voice rising slightly. I provide structure. Without me, there will be chaos. I protect them. You're not protecting them. You're torturing them, keeping them locked in their worst moments forever. That's not protection. It's just more abuse. The other entities were moving closer now, forming a circle around Alex and Blackwood. Alex could feel their attention, their desperate hope that someone finally understood, that someone might actually help them. You cannot free them, Blackwood said. They're bound here. The building is their cage. Destroying it will only cause them more pain. Maybe, Alex agreed, or maybe it'll break whatever's keeping them anchored. Maybe fire can cleanse what fire created. It's worth trying. If you do this, you'll die too. The fire will spread too quickly. You'll be trapped just like they were. Alex pulled out the matches. Then I'll be in good company. For the first time, something like emotion crossed Blackwood's face. Uncertainty, fear, perhaps, of losing the structure he'd built, the system he'd maintained for decades. Please, he said, and the words sounded wrong coming from him, rusty and used. Don't do this. I need them. I need the order. Without it, I'm nothing. You're already nothing, Alex said gently. You're a ghost clinging to a delusion. It's time to let go. He struck the match. The match flared to life, a tiny sun in the darkness of the basement. And for a single frozen moment, nothing moved. Alex could see every face in that flickering light. The burned patients with their melted features, the lobotomized victims with their hollow eyes, and Blackwood, his black eyes reflecting the flame like obsidian mirrors. The administrator's mouth opened as though to give another order, to reassert control one final time, but no words came. The match fell from Alex's fingers and landed on the line of kerosene he'd poured across the ancient wooden floor. Fire rushed along the accelerant like water, finding its level, spreading in both directions with a hungry whoosh. The flames were orange and gold, beautiful in their destructive purity, and they raced toward the road flares Alex had positioned in key locations throughout the basement. Within seconds, multiple fires were burning, crawling up the old wooden support beams, finding purchase on walls that hadn't seen maintenance in 70 years. The entities didn't flee. Instead, they stepped toward the flames, drawn to them like moths. The burned patients moved first, walking into the fire with expressions of relief, almost joy. As the flames touched them, their forms began to dissolve, not burning, but unraveling, coming apart into streams of light that rose upward and disappeared. They were being released, Alex realized. The fire wasn't destroying them, but freeing them from the anchor that had held them captive. No, Blackwood's voice cracked with desperation. He lunged toward Alex, his form becoming more substantial than Alex had ever seen it, hands reaching with genuine physicality. You're destroying everything. The system, the order. They need me. Alex stumbled backward, and his back hit the concrete wall. Blackwood's hands closed around his throat, cold but solid, squeezing. The administrator's face was inches from his own, and Alex could see past the professional mask to the terrified man beneath. Blackwood wasn't evil, not really. He was just broken, clinging to his role, because without it he had no identity, no purpose. They don't need you. Alex gasped, his vision starting to blur. They need to be free. Let them go. Let yourself go. The other entities were gathering around them now, the ones who weren't already dissolving in the cleansing fire. They reached toward Blackwood, not in anger, but in something like pity. Their translucent hands touched his shoulders, his arms, his face, and wherever they made contact, cracks appeared in his form, light seeping through. "Let go," Alex whispered again. "It's over. You can rest now." Blackwood's grip loosened. The certainty in his black eyes wavered, and for just a moment, Alex saw the man he'd been before the fire, before the decades of delusion. Just a person who'd made terrible choices and never found a way to make them right. Tears formed in those impossible eyes, and Blackwood's form began to crack apart, light pouring from every fissure. "I'm sorry," Blackwood said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the growing fire. "I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing what was right." "I know," Alex said. "It's okay. You can let go now." Blackwood released him and stepped back. His form was disintegrating rapidly now, coming apart into streamers of light that joined the others, rising toward the ceiling. For just a second, Alex saw the man's face, not as the stern administrator, but as he must have looked in life. Middle-aged, tired, with the deep sadness of someone who'd lost his way long ago. Then Blackwood was gone, and Alex was alone with the fire. The flames had spread faster than he'd anticipated. The entire basement was an inferno now, heat pressing against him like a physical force. Smoke was filling the corridors, thick and black, making it hard to breathe. Alex grabbed his camera and started running back toward the stairs, but a section of ceiling collapsed ahead of him, cutting off his escape route. He spun around, looking for another way out. There had to be other exits, emergency stairwells that led up to the store. But the smoke was so thick now, he couldn't see more than a few feet. His lungs were burning, each breath painful. He dropped to his hands and knees where the air was slightly clearer and crawled forward, feeling his way along the wall. His hand found a doorway. He pulled himself through and found himself in what must have been a cell, small and square with walls that had once been padded. At the far end was a window, small and high, blocked by rusted bars. But through the bars, Alex could see the night sky, stars visible beyond the smoke. He stacked debris beneath the window, climbed up, and grabbed the bars. They were old, weakened by decades of rust and moisture. Alex put all his weight on them, pulling with desperate strength. One bar groaned and shifted, then another. The third one came free entirely, clattering to the floor. The opening was just barely large enough for him to squeeze through. Alex hauled himself up and through the window, emerging into a narrow space between the store's foundation and the ground level. He was outside, in the gap that existed between the basement and the parking lot. He could feel fresh air, could see the fluorescent glow from the store's exterior lights. He crawled toward it, pulling himself forward with his arms, his legs scraping against concrete and metal. He emerged in the loading dock area behind the store, collapsing onto the pavement and gasping for breath. His clothes were covered in soot. His hands were bleeding, and every part of him hurt. But he was alive, he was outside, and behind him, beneath the Walmart, the fire was spreading. Alex pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Fire," he managed to say between coughs. "Boise Valley Walmart on Fairview Avenue. There's a fire in the basement. It's spreading fast." He hung up before the dispatcher could ask more questions. In the distance, he could already hear sirens. Someone else must have seen the smoke and called it in. Alex stood on shaking legs and moved toward the front of the building. He needed to make sure no one was inside. Needed to get Tom out if he was still in his office. The front doors were locked, but through the windows, Alex could see smoke beginning to seep up through the floor tiles, wisps of gray that curled and spread across the ceiling. The fire alarm should have been screaming. The sprinkler system should have activated, but nothing was happening. The store's safety systems had failed, or perhaps the entities had interfered one final time, ensuring that their prison would burn completely. Alex ran around to the employee entrance and found Tom standing outside, already on his phone, calling someone. When he saw Alex covered in soot, Tom's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally resignation. "You did this," Tom said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I did. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "The investigation, the questions, they're going to trace this back to you. You'll go to prison for arson." "I have documentation," Alex said, pulling out his camera. "Video of what's really down there. The old asylum, the evidence of what happened. I'll say I was documenting it when an electrical fire started. Old wiring, dangerous conditions that management knew about but ignored." Tom stared at him for a long moment. "You think they'll believe you?" "I think once people see what's in that basement, they'll have bigger questions than who started the fire. And either way, it's done. Those people are free now. That's what matters." Fire trucks arrived, followed by police cars and ambulances. Firefighters rushed toward the building, but it was already too late. The fire had reached the main structure, flames visible through windows, smoke pouring from the roof. The building was a total loss. Anyone could see that. The best they could do was contain it, keep it from spreading to neighboring businesses. Alex gave his statement to the police. He'd been cleaning, noticed smoke, went to investigate, found the sealed door to the basement open and fire spreading rapidly. He tried to escape through the basement, but got turned around in the smoke, had to climb out a window. Tom corroborated the basic story. Yes, there were sealed areas in the basement, remnants of the old building that had been on the site. No, management hadn't properly inspected them recently. Yes, the fire safety systems had been giving them trouble. The investigators found Alex's story plausible enough. The camera helped, showing footage of the basement's dangerous condition before the fire started. An electrical fire in poorly maintained spaces, full of old wood and debris, made perfect sense. No accelerants were mentioned in the initial reports, and by the time any thorough investigation could be conducted, the rain that had been threatening all evening finally arrived, soaking the ruins and washing away evidence. By dawn, the Walmart was a smoking skeleton. The roof had collapsed, the walls were unstable, and the entire structure would need to be demolished. Walmart's corporate office issued a statement about the tragedy, pledged to investigate the cause, and quietly decided that rebuilding on that site wasn't financially viable. The property would be sold, the lot cleared, and something else would be built there eventually. But not yet. For now, it would remain empty ground, and sometimes, on quiet nights, locals would report seeing lights moving through the ruins, figures walking among the debris. But these were different from before, not trapped or suffering, just passing through, saying goodbye to a place they no longer had to haunt. Alex didn't go to prison. The investigation concluded that the fire had been accidental, caused by faulty wiring in the poorly maintained basement. He was even portrayed somewhat sympathetically in the local news, the young employee who'd nearly died trying to document unsafe conditions. Walmart quietly settled with him out of court, a sum large enough to keep him quiet and comfortable for several years. Tom disappeared shortly after, just stopped showing up to his apartment, stopped answering his phone. His truck was found abandoned at a rest stop 3 states over. Some said he'd fled because he knew too much about the store's secrets, feared being blamed. Others thought he'd simply reached his breaking point and needed to vanish into a new life. Alex suspected the truth was somewhere in between. Angela sent him a message a week after the fire. "You crazy bastard. You actually did it. How does it feel?" Alex thought about that question for a long time before responding. "Like I finally did something that mattered. Like maybe some things are worth a risk." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Really okay?" "I don't know yet," Alex admitted. "Ask me in a year." But the nightmares came, as he'd known they would. Not every night, but often enough. He'd dream of the basement, of Blackwood's hands around his throat, of the burned patients walking into the flames. Sometimes he'd dream of Elizabeth Harrison, the great-grandmother he'd never known, And in these dreams, she'd smile at him and say thank you before dissolving into light. He started seeing a therapist, a woman who specialized in trauma. He didn't tell her the full truth. That would have sounded like delusion, but he told her enough. About the fire, the fear, the guilt of knowing his actions had destroyed a building and ended several jobs, even if it had been necessary. She helped him process it, taught him coping mechanisms, assured him that what he was experiencing was normal for someone who'd survived what he'd survived. 3 months after the fire, Alex got a job at a bookstore. Normal hours, normal customers, nothing remotely supernatural. It was boring, and he'd never been so grateful for boredom in his life. He'd had enough excitement to last a lifetime. But sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Alex would drive past the empty lot where the Walmart had stood. The demolition had been completed, the rubble cleared away, leaving only bare earth. Grass was starting to grow, nature reclaiming the space. And standing there, looking at that empty ground, Alex felt something he couldn't quite name. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction, but a sense that he'd done something right, something necessary, even if the cost had been high. He'd freed them, all of them. The patients who'd been trapped by trauma, the staff who'd been caught in their own guilt, even Blackwood who'd been imprisoned by his need for control. They were all at rest now, or at least no longer suffering. And if Alex had nightmares, if he sometimes woke up gasping with the phantom sensation of smoke in his lungs, well, that seemed like a fair price to pay. One evening, about 6 months after the fire, Alex received a package with no return address. Inside was a notebook, old and worn, filled with handwritten entries. He recognized that some of the handwriting from the notes he'd found in the store, janitors who had worked there over the years, documenting their experiences. But there were new entries too, added after the fire. The first new entry read, "To whoever reads this, the Boise Valley Walmart is gone, but this notebook survives as a testament to what happened there. Let be a warning and a memorial. Some places hold suffering so deep it creates its own gravity, trapping the dead in endless loops of trauma. We failed to help those souls for decades, but one person had the courage to do what needed to be done. This is his story, and theirs. Remember them." The entries that followed were accounts from other people who'd worked at the store, adding their stories to the historical record. Tom's story was there too, explaining his arrangement with Blackwood, his guilt over the people he'd failed to protect, his relief when the fire finally ended it all. He'd left Idaho, he wrote, because he couldn't stand being in a place that reminded him of his complicity. But he wanted people to know the truth. The final entry was in Angela's handwriting. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means you survived and the notebook found you. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. I've been in touch with other former employees, and we all agree. You gave them peace. That took incredible courage. The nightmares will fade eventually. The guilt will ease. You did the right thing, even if it was also the hard thing. Thank you for having the strength we didn't. Angela." Alex closed the notebook and sat with it for a long time, feeling the weight of all those stories, all those lives touched by that place. Then he placed it carefully in a box with his other mementos from that time. His final paycheck from Walmart, the list of rules he'd found, printouts of news articles about the fire. Someday, maybe, he'd donate it all to the Historical Society. Let it become part of the official record. Proof that the Idaho State Hospital for the Mentally Infirm's legacy had extended far beyond its 1952 destruction. But for now, he'd keep it private, a reminder of the strangest and most terrifying period of his life. Alex returned to his normal life, working at a bookstore, go to therapy, slowly rebuilding his sense of safety in the world. He dated a woman named Claire who worked at the coffee shop next door. And after a few months, he told her a carefully edited version of his Walmart experience. She listened without judgment and held him when the nightmares came. Years passed. The empty lot where the Walmart had stood was eventually sold to a developer who built a small office park. Alex attended the groundbreaking ceremony out of morbid curiosity, watching as bulldozers prepare the earth for new construction. The workers reported no unusual incidents, no strange sounds, no unexplained equipment failures, no sense of being watched. The land was clean, cleansed by fire and time. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, Alex would hear whispers, not threatening or malevolent, but grateful. Voices thanking him for what he'd done, for giving them the freedom they'd been denied for so long. And among those voices, he'd sometimes hear one that sounded like it might be Elizabeth Harrison, his great-grandmother, welcoming him to a family he'd never known existed. Alex never worked a night shift again. He'd learned his lesson about the darkness and what it could contain. But he also never forgot what he'd learned in that Walmart, about courage and sacrifice, about the importance of seeing what others refused to acknowledge, about the responsibility that came with awareness. The rules he'd followed had been designed to keep him blind, to keep him safe through ignorance. But true safety didn't come from not seeing. It came from seeing clearly and choosing to act anyway, even when action was terrifying. Especially then, on the first anniversary of the fire, Alex drove to the cemetery where Elizabeth Harrison was buried. He'd never visited before, had only learned of the grave's location through genealogy research. It was a simple headstone, worn by weather, with just her name and dates. He placed flowers on the grave and stood there for a long time, not praying exactly, but thinking about all the lives that had been cut short by cruelty and indifference. "I hope you're at peace now," he said quietly. "All of you. You deserved so much better than what you got. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to try to make it right." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees that surrounded the cemetery. And for just a moment, Alex felt something like a touch on his shoulder. Light and warm. Not the cold grip of the entities in the store, but something gentler. An acknowledgement. An acceptance. A farewell. He left the cemetery feeling lighter than he had in months. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they changed, became less about being chased and trapped, and more about choosing to face what frightened him. In these new dreams, he'd stand before the fire and feel its heat not as a threat, but as a promise of transformation. Endings that were also beginnings. Alex never regretted what he'd done, even on the hardest days when the memories pressed down like physical weight. He'd broken the rules, violated every guideline designed to keep him safe, and in doing so he'd freed dozens of suffering souls. If that wasn't worth a few sleepless nights and lingering fear, then nothing was. And late at night, when he couldn't sleep, Alex would sometimes take out the list of rules he'd found in that game case so long ago. He'd read through them, remembering each one's purpose, understanding now why they'd existed. Don't mop aisle 13 between 2 and 3 a.m. Never count the shopping carts. If you hear music, walk away. Don't answer unseen voices. Keep the televisions off. Avoid the freezer alone. Close your eyes passing mirrors. Don't step inside circles. Ignore what's outside. Leave before sunrise. Don't let them know you can see them. 11 rules designed to keep night shift workers alive by keeping them blind. Alex had broken all of them, had paid the price, and had somehow survived. But more importantly, he'd helped others finally stop surviving and start resting. The list went into the box with the other mementos, artifacts of a chapter of his life that had closed. And when Alex turned off his bedroom light and lay down to sleep, he did so knowing that somewhere, somehow, Elizabeth Harrison and all the others were finally at peace. And that made everything, the fear, the nightmares, the trauma, worth it. The most mundane places could hold the most terrible secrets, Alex had learned. But they could also hold opportunities for courage, for change, for making things right even when the cost was high. He'd never look at a Walmart the same way again, or any building really. Every structure had history, held memories, contained stories. Most of them were ordinary, but some weren't. And for those that weren't, sometimes all they needed was one person willing to see clearly, to act bravely, and to light the match that would finally let the dead rest. Alex had been that person. And whatever else happened in his life, whatever else he did or didn't accomplish, he'd always have that. The knowledge that when it mattered most, when lives hung in a balance, even if those lives were already over, he'd done the right thing. He followed the rules until he understood them, and then he broke in every single one to set the prisoners free,